All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today. It is indeed Wednesday. And I hope you got a chance to listen to the program I did yesterday with Mike Hirsch. So glad to have Mike on. Really was a treat, and we just couldn't stop ourselves. Usually, as you know, I try to keep my live streams to an hour. I think that's certainly a biteable chunk, right? I mean, even that's a lot. But you can get through it if you can in one sitting. You come back after two, after you take a little bit of a break and you can catch the rest of it, flip around, what have you. 2 hours, 2.5 hours, I just think is too long. I've seen plenty of live streams that go that long. RBN, Revolutionary Black Network, does long form, and that's really long form streams, as has Brianna Joy Gray on her podcast, The Bad Faith show. But I try to really be mindful of limited attention spans and other obligations, and other calls on us. So I try to keep it under or at an hour maximum. With Mike and me, we just couldn't stop. This happens with us. We have strong feelings and generally agree, but not always. So I want to just spend another moment or two with the topic that we really were ostensibly focused on, which was the race for U.S. Senate in Maryland, with Larry Hogan, the former governor, the Republican governor, entering against one of the very, very likely, almost certain Democratic candidates, David Trone, the Congress member from Western Maryland, and Angela Also Brooks, who is the county executive in Prince George's County. And I don't really like either one. I was taken by what Mike said at the end, which is, hey, the important races generally are the primaries. That's where you have an opportunity to really vote for a progressive. The Democratic primaries, I've taken the position in many cases, not all, a little piece of coffee grind in my throat. I use a French press for my coffee. And I know it sounds fancy, but it's actually very, very simple. And probably the least expensive way, I think, to make coffee. You just pour the hot water over the grinds and then press them down after a little bit of time. And I find it has the best flavor, but sometimes you get a little bit of soot, a little bit of grit, because you don't have that fine filter that you do with other types of coffee, coffee making techniques. So Mike's argument, among several, is, and I don't want to mischaracterize, I don't know if he's watching, he's certainly free to call in, is that, hey, you have to take, the best you can get, and sometimes a Democrat who's not great is going to be a lot better than the Republican. That's his view in the race that we'll see here in Maryland. But the important race is often the primary. And I think that's true. I think we had some decent options, certainly in recent primaries. Bernie Sanders in 2016 was a really good option. He was a solid option. He talked about issues that really matter. I don't think he was as good an option in 2020. He was not as good. I think there was a little glitch there. I apologize. Maybe not quite as good in 2020. He had stopped talking about trade, which I think is the most, one of the most important issues, and certainly an issue that could rally, bring people together, bring a coalition of diverse folks, diverse identity groups together. And he really stopped talking about trade. I wish he hadn't done that. But still, he was the best of not great options. He was the only one that was really pretty decent. We'll talk about his one of his main opponents in that 2020 election, Democratic primary elections. That would be Kamala Harris in a moment, and she's kind of the focus. But I do want to just stick for just a moment longer with the Maryland race and Mike Hirsch. And one of the points he made is, yes, you should look at the primaries, but he didn't endorse either Also Brooks or Trone, and I won't do that either. They both seem pretty similar to me. His point was that this is a case where the Republicans really bad, so you have to vote against him. And one of his strong arguments, and it definitely caused me to pause, it wasn't something I was aware of, was apparently during Trone's first term, very early on, maybe his first year in office, he called for cuts to neonatal and not neo, yeah, mothers, expecting mothers and children program. And that is really bad, right? I mean, we have very high infant mortality rates in this country, and we have high death rates for pregnant women. And that's very, very bad. And the last thing I want to see is a governor, a president, whatever, an executive, a mayor, cutting necessary funds to protect pregnant women, protect their children, their expected children. And according to Mike, and I certainly believe him, I didn't know this, Hogan called to cut those programs. That's really cut that one of those programs. That's really awful. According to Mike, the money was restored. I couldn't confirm that. I looked for evidence of that. I believe it. He said he was in Annapolis at the time, which makes perfect sense because he's very involved in politics there. So that's a black mark, a smudge, a very serious mark against Hogan. And maybe you say, okay, well, neither Trone nor Alsobrooks is for Medicare for all, but at least Trone is now calling for a ceasefire in Israel, Gaza, which is a good thing. And, he's not the worst. So maybe we can vote for him, and maybe we'll look at Alsobrooks' record. Maybe we can vote for her. I wanted to do some more because, again, if there's a real clear gap, if one candidate is clearly much worse than the others or than the other one, even if the other, even if one of them is a Democrat, even if the less bad one is a Democrat, I'm not against voting for them. It's just a question of whether there's really a meaningful difference. And unfortunately, so often there isn't. So I got John. We'll get to you in just a sec, John. I'm going to just mute you there for 1 sec. I promise to get you on. So is Hogan really clearly worse? And I don't know. This is relating to the issue of care for pregnant women. He did announce his program. Now, this was his last year. He was, his second to last year. He had to step down in 22. He was elected in 2014, took office at the end of 2014, and he left office at the end of 22. He did announce this funding program to reduce maternal mortality. It wasn't just performative. Was it done? Did he do it just because he knew he was leaving office and he was going to run for president? He thought it would look good. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure there was a lot of political thought gone into this. There was clearly a political move. But that said, it's still a good thing. He did the right thing here. He did something that the Democratic legislature hadn't done. And, I'm going to give him credit for it. If we're going to take credit from him for cutting funds or trying to cut funds for pregnant women, then here he gets credit for restoring funds or for adding funds or for putting, another $72 million out there, which he's providing through the Health Services Cost Review Commission. So that, and Maryland Medicaid. So that is a positive. And I think we have to recognize that as well if we're going to detract from him, and keep that in mind. If we're going to say you have to vote for a Democrat, do you really have to? And then just the flip side of this, and I don't think this is all terrible. I mention it, because to me, policy is everything. And so here was a policy that Hogan announced I didn't like. I don't think it's something that is so horrible that you have to vote, you can't vote for, I wouldn't vote for him. I mean, so clearly I would. The question is, it's so awful that you have to hold your nose and vote for his opponent. Is this policy so bad that absent something equally bad that the Democrat is doing or has done or proposes or wants to do, you can't vote, you have to vote for the Democrat? And I'm not clear. He did call for ending expanded unemployment COVID benefits. I think that was wrong. It was done to placate or at the behest of corporate interests in the state who didn't want to have to keep raising wages, right? A lot of people were saying, hey, I'm getting these benefits. I'm not going to take that crappy job for low pay and long hours with bad working conditions. And that's good. We want people to be choosy, to not just simply take an absolutely awful job where maybe their health is put at risk and their pay is lousy. Their conditions are bad. The bosses treat them poorly. And that was, workers had a bit of leverage because they knew they could get those benefits if they didn't go back to work. And that didn't sit well with the corporate interests and the big and small businesses in Maryland that largely backed Hogan. He said, I'm going to stop those expanded benefits. There was a big political fight over it. Some Democrats didn't disagree with Hogan. They saw his rationale. I kind of see it as well, which is if there are jobs out there, the unemployment rate is low, then people should be trying to get back to work. And I do get that. I think the real issue is these kinds of programs, when Democrats push for them, they're very divisive. People who are already working, who are working hard, are saying, wait, why am I working so hard for somebody who isn't? And I know it's far more complicated than that, but that's how people see it. And Democrats put themselves in a position where they're looked at by many working people as not on their side because they don't champion the policies that really would make life better for working people, like Medicare for all, like debt-free education, like making it much easier for working people to unionize. So again, we see working people pitted against each other, with Democrats siding with some unemployed folks, and maybe some people who were working at that time saying, you know, the Democrats aren't on my side. That said, I think Hogan was wrong here. Disagree with him. He was doing it at the behest of the rich and powerful and influential, not poor, struggling, and working Marylanders. Hogan's not a good guy. I would never vote for Hogan. The question is he so bad, and are the Democrats marginally good enough that we vote for them over Hogan? I'm not there yet. That story, that record of Hogan's is bad, and what Hirsch said really did move me, because if you're going to take money away from poor, struggling, and working pregnant women, that is a terrible thing. We do see the flip side of it, where Hogan did announce and did follow through on a program to help expectant mothers. All right, let's get to John. John, you're on with Hal. What's up?
Good morning. So it sounds to me like, and I know Joe Manchin's not running again. I think Kristen Sinema is not going to be reelected either. But it sounds to me like you're not really on board with helping to make them irrelevant, you know?
Make whom? Make what irrelevant? I'm sorry. I didn't hear that.
So Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema were the reason that we couldn't get, protect the vote bill. We couldn't get like a national voter protection bill. There were quite a few other things that they blocked. I'm getting reverb. Is that?
Yeah, I had to boost you a little bit because your audio is very in and out. John, I wasn't getting, okay. I muted myself, so I'm sorry if I was sending a little bit of audio back to you. That was done to prevent listeners from hearing the feedback. But let's try it again. I'm going to see whether we can keep that out of your ear.
Okay. All right. So what I saw as the next step in the fight toward making the Democrats a more America-friendly country, worker-friendly country, was making Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema irrelevant, either by voting more Democratic senators in or replacing them. And I don't think replacing them was realistic. Only now, Joe Manchin's stepping down, and he'll probably be succeeded by a Republican. And Kristen Sinema is running as an independent, and she's polling at like 11 or 12% in Arizona. I don't think she's going to get reelected. So it's a big question as to who's going to replace her. I honestly think we're going to get two Republicans instead of them. I don't know if that's such a huge difference other than they're going to control the committees in the Senate. if they win a Senate majority. But somebody who maybe like your friend, was it Mike yesterday?
Yeah, that's right. That was Mike. And let me just jump in real quick. And I listened to everything you said closely, John. I assume you didn't get
I
that
wasn't
feedback.
Done yet, but I'll let you. I wasn't
did you
done
get
yet,
the?
Go ahead.
No, I'll let you finish. I'm not going to interrupt. I'm going to let you finish. I understand you hadn't phrased. I just wanted to confirm your audio now is better. It's a little bit in and out. I think you got some feedback at the end, but I know I'm playing technical games with people, but just want to make sure everything is clear and easily understood and there's no problem. So everything working okay now?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was in a cellular dead zone a few minutes ago. Yeah, there's no reverb now. Well, anyway,
Go ahead, John.
What I felt was the next step was making them irrelevant and keeping a majority, and then watching and seeing what happens. And if somebody else jumps in and decides to be the mansion and the cinema, then we got to get rid of them. It's very frustrating. It is very frustrating dealing with the Democrats, especially after 2009, when we had 59 senators, and Harry Reid could have changed the filibuster policy with simple majority vote. He didn't. And that was enough for Joe Lieberman to keep the public option from going through, and because they filibustered that. And I think ultimately Obama had it pulled from the legislation. With 59 senators, though, you think that we could have at least got that. Now, I that's why I'm kind of a little bit forgiving with you when you take this stance, although I think you're an extremist. But I just think that the time to replace these people is in the primaries, and we've got to really work to get our fellow progressives involved in primaries. There's got to be better turnout in primaries.
Let me, now I am going to jump in, John. I'm sorry. I felt like I was talking to Mike for a sec, but I know I wasn't. That's Mike's view, right? I mean, that's why I said Mike, because he said the same thing. We have to be involved in primaries. I have so many criticisms of the Democratic Party. One of the problems, though, that you raised is if the Democrats, I want to say if the Democrats lose Manchin and Sinema, in a way, it's not so bad because, like you said, they held up. They really significantly stymied some pretty important stuff. But and also Manchin jammed through that terrible Mountain Valley pipeline and probably Willow Creek as well. But the problem there is, John, I know you see this, and is the courts, right? I mean, the Republicans will stop any federal judicial nominations by Biden, or if it's Harris over the next 4 years if they control the Senate. They'll stop any justice who's left of center. And lots of times the Democrats nominate conservative justices. Merrick Garland's a conservative, but even then they held him up because they were confident they would get even more extreme folks on the court, and they were right.
Yeah, I have seen, that's one area where we mostly talk about legislation. I do see a stark difference in the nominees that have gone to the courts. And I mean, you could go back to some landmark decisions like Citizens United. That was down party lines. The Voting Rights Act, when they gutted Article 4, that was down party lines. Roe v. Wade or Dobbs, I mean, that was down party lines.
Bush v. Gore.
Really, really
John, Bush v. Gore.
Yeah, Bush v. Gore. But to your point, where sometimes, the Democratic nominee is problematic, there was another case where Breyer kind of went with the conservatives, and it was kind of alarming. It was some case from Utah where a guy was illegally searched, But the Supreme Court ultimately, he was illegally, he basically went into an apartment that was being cased out by cops. And he went in, he went out, and they really didn't have anything. They didn't have any evidence that this guy was a problem, but they were kind of building evidence that it was a good idea to get a warrant to go into the apartment. But just merely somebody going in and out of the apartment is not sufficient evidence to stop them on the street and search them. But that's what the cops did. They followed this guy. They searched him. They asked him for his ID. And apparently in Utah, like, that was not okay to do. You couldn't do that. So not without probable cause, at least at the time. And he showed his ID, and then they ran his ID and found out he had a warrant for his arrest. So then they searched him. Then when they searched him, they found drugs. So his defense attorney said, wait a minute, it was illegal for them to ask for his ID to begin with. They weren't allowed to do that. What happened was it ultimately went to the Supreme Court, and Breyer jumped to the other side and said the fact that he had drugs and a warrant attenuated the illegal search and legitimized it. Now, can you believe that? That's real. I would have to look up the name of the case, but I'm sure you could put in enough Google searches. So, but on the other hand, Breyer was one of the votes that we needed, that we really needed to go against Citizens United. That was huge. And we were outnumbered. But,
you raised some really good points, John. I'm going to jump in again, and I'm not kicking you out. I just want to say you raised some really good points. This is one of the reasons I don't want the courts to be the, litmus test. Well, we have to elect Democrats. We have to vote for Democrats because of the courts. Yes, on balance, Democratic judges are better or not as bad as Republican ones. Democratic justices are, on balance, more concerned about economic issues. They're more economic justice issues. They're more willing to rule in favor of the small fry, right? The small man or woman rather than the wealthy and powerful. But that's not always invariably the case. You just don't always know how justices will rule. Justice Souter was one of the best justices, I think, of the past 50 years. And he was H.W. Bush's nominee, I believe. So you don't always know. I think you have to look at policy. And I go back to something I've been saying over and over. I think the Democrats, on balance, haven't been as bad. On balance. On some issues that I care really, really, really about, you and I disagree on some of those, they're as bad or worse. But either way, regardless of who's in charge, since Bill Clinton has been president, I believe we've been moving in the wrong direction. Both parties are leading us down the garden path. And I think we have to do something differently. The biggest frustration I have is when you talk about primaries, I look at it, and again, we disagree. I look at some of these progressive Democrats, and I feel like they've been feckless, they've been useless, and they've often made things worse because they promote a certain kind of politics that puts off tens of millions of Americans who should be joining in a coalition with other working class Americans, with others who are politically progressive, to move away from this duopoly and from this the corporate state that we now sadly inhabit.
So what I think is that when I go to the ballot box, I'm going to do what I think is the best choice, even if it's only slightly better. Now, the late great Ed Schultz. Did you used to listen to and like Ed Schultz?
I loved Ed. I thought he was great. I thought he was underrated in terms of how good he was.
He made, I think, one of the best comments he ever made. That was where he said, at this point in the game, any large movements here, any large changes are going to have to be consumer driven. And I think, what he basically meant is boycotts and general strikes. Boycotts and strikes. And I was listening to, and I think it was NPR the other night. I'm not sure. I listened to different things at night in the shower. I think it was NPR. They were talking about a historic strike back in, I don't know when was Mother Jones alive and on the picket lines? Was that the 1920s?
I'm thinking 120 years ago, John. I could be wrong. I'm thinking right around the turn of the 20th century.
Okay, so she basically got a bunch of women to strike. There was some factory pretty much employed only women, and she said, "We are prepared to starve in order to get what we want here." They were in a very precarious position. The corporate America will put you there. They'll deliberately, build this house of cards that you have to live in so that it's easy to knock it down, or it's easy to yank the rug out from under you, I guess, making it very, very difficult to live. But these women said they knew the company was hurting from lost revenue, and they said, we will sooner starve than capitulate to, your exploitation. And they ultimately won. And I think things were probably really bad back then, and things have to get really bad again, to the point where people are willing to become homeless and willing to go hungry, to stop the economic machine that's exploiting them, to bring it to a screeching halt.
Well, that sounds to me.
Back to why I
all
brought
right,
up
so let me ask you. Let me jump in real quick again, one more time, John, and then I'm going to ask you a question and then let you go, because I think you made a great point. But what you're saying, as I hear it, is then maybe we don't vote for Democrats just because they're a little bit better at preserving some of what's left of the safety net, because that safety net, to a degree, prevents the kind of revolution that we actually need. And if we vote for Democrats who do provide enough SNAP so people aren't starving and maybe keep a few people in their apartments so they're not homeless, those folks aren't going to go rioting in the streets. And you're saying, I think we need those riots. So does that mean don't vote for Democrats just because they'll preserve a few of the shreds of the safety net that still remain?
That's not really what I was saying. What I was saying is always take the best choice that you're given on the ballot. But ultimately, those safety nets right now are not keeping people off the streets, by the way. There's a great YouTube channel called Invisible People, and this guy interviews homeless people, and a lot of them get Social Security checks, and Social Security checks are not getting them off the streets.
Some are working, John. People sleep in their cars who have jobs. So do you think because this was a debate we had yesterday, my point was that in Democratic-controlled states, and I know the federal government ultimately has to be the backstop, not the states, but what I'm saying is I don't feel like the Democrats have been there really for the poor, struggling workers either.
I think at the state level, it's hard to come up with the revenue. The federal government, when it's not willing to provide the money for these type of emergencies, even a state like California would struggle handling, the homeless issue. It's just California, when it borrows money, has to borrow at the going rate. It's got to sell a bond that sells it. I don't know, what is it, like 5 or 6% now? And the federal government sells a bond at less than, closer to 0% than 1%. So that money really, in order to combat large problems like that, has to come from the federal government, and it's not there. They're not really.
No, I hear you. I got you. A final word, John. I'll respond to that, but I'm going to let you go in a second. I want to respond to what you just said because I think there's a lot to it. a lot of truth, but I don't think it's the whole story. But anything else before I let you go? Because I promised listeners I'm not going to go past one or just past one. So I don't want to. I got a lot I got to get to.
The only thing else that I would say is when you take these positions like, AOC decided to break down and vote for Nancy Pelosi, try to see the nuance in it and try to look at that from somebody else's perspective, maybe somebody on the street who really needs that lifeline that Pelosi's willing to give them and that, these Republicans are not willing to give them. The most vulnerable among us, try to view politics from their point of view.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. There's no question. I appreciate that call very much. That's John checking in. Much appreciated. I wanted to just respond to the point about the greater expenses. States obviously have much more limited resources than the federal government. Federal government should be stepping in, of course, to help people who are homeless. State of California, though, has tremendous amount of wealth and resources, bigger than most or many countries. And what it won't do, and I understand it is more expensive, and they have to balance their budgets, I believe, under state constitution. But what they could do, and what they absolutely refuse to even consider doing, is raising top marginal tax rates. Raise your top rates on those Silicon Valley billionaires. Raise your income tax that you charge the Hollywood moguls. And by the way, impose an estate tax. I don't believe California has an estate tax. People die in California with estates of billions and billions of dollars. And it's taxed at 40%, and that 40% is the federal government's margin. It's all by the federal government. New York State has a 16% estate tax. And that's on every dollar of estates over, I think, 8 or 10 or 6, whatever it is, $6 billion, $8, $10 billion. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that it should be stepped up. And it shouldn't be imposed on states under a certain amount. But, below a certain amount should be exempt, is what I'm saying. But New York raises a tremendous amount of money by taxing estates. And, of course, you have billionaires in New York, many of them through Wall Street and other industries in that populous and wealthy state. Why doesn't California tax estates? I don't understand that. They should. Well, I do understand it because they're in thrall to the billionaire class. That's a huge problem. That needs to change. I did promote today's program. There's been a lot of talk about Kamala Harris. That this was about. There's been a lot of talk about how Biden is, clearly lost a few miles per hour in his fastball. It's the best way I can put it. He was kind of a gaffe machine even before he took office. And, before when he was working he's been in office for 60 years, but he's always been a gaffe machine as far as I can remember. Says a lot of things wrong, has trouble articulating, and it's gotten worse. It's gotten consistently worse because he's gotten older. He's confusing the leaders of European countries, of our allies. He's calling, Macron Mitterrand, who's been dead for 8 years, 9 years, whatever it is. He just got senioritis. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And Americans are concerned. So who would be next in line? Well, obviously it would be she. It would be Kamala Harris. And she has made clear that as far as she's concerned, as far as Kamala is concerned, she's rested and ready to go. How do you feel about that? That's a question. How do you feel? Do you feel like, well, as long as we've got Kamala there, things should be okay? Or does that not relieve you? I'm going to play this clip from CBS News. I thought it was really interesting. I thought they did I won't say they did a good job, but it's something to certainly look at and consider, because I've taken the position we have to vote for the Green. I am not a fan of Kamala Harris any more than I am of Joe Biden. So this doesn't change my opinion, but curious what you think. So here we go. By the way, call in at any time, 242-5646. You can see the number there. And by the way, don't forget to click subscribe. I have seen the numbers inching up. I'm always saying that. The Halitics numbers, that is the numbers in the Facebook group, which I also urge you to join, are ticking up. I want to see not just a tick, but a trickle, and then a stream, and then ultimately a river of new subscribers. Here's CBS News on Kamala Harris.
President Biden's allies are fighting back against the special counsel's report, raising new questions about his mental fitness. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris is saying she would be ready if needed. She told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "I am ready to serve. There's no question about that," and that everyone who sees her on the job, quote, "walks away fully aware of my capacity to lead."
All right, I'm going to stop it there for a second. We'll get back to it. That's kind of an interesting way that she phrased it, and I don't think it, well, I don't know. Does it give you relief? Does that put your mind at ease if you had worries about whether Kamala Harris, and I think most people question her ability to lead. I think most people, she was doing very, very poorly in the 2020 primaries. She had been touted as a potential winner. And I don't think if she even was in the race when the California primary occurred, which was on Super Tuesday, I believe she'd already dropped out. She wasn't going to win anyway in her own home state. She says, there's no question about my capability of serving. I'm ready. And she says, everyone who sees her on the job walks away fully aware of my capacity to lead. And I think that's kind of an ironic statement, because I think a lot of people walk away fully aware that she's not capable of leading, right? We know she's not the right person for the job. And that's my view. I don't know that she would be a terrible president. People can surprise you. She has shown in the past some glimmers that she's concerned about poor Australian working Americans. But those glimmers are pretty much outshone by very serious and significant problems that she's also demonstrated with respect to her abilities. Let's continue to play this.
Maura Gillespie and Ashley Etienne join us now. Maura is a former Ashley is a CBS News political contributor and former communications director to Vice President Harris. Ashley, I want to start with you because it's not a surprise that the vice president made these remarks, which could apply to any vice president, but it's different given the president's health concerns, his age. What do you make of her comments here? And is there any concern that they could backfire if people don't want to vote for Harris for president?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I would start by saying there are no health concerns for the president. That's not proven. But here's the thing: the vice president.
So this is the thing. These flacks, they treat us like we're idiots, right? I mean, they treat us like we're so stupid, and we're just, they say something that so clearly flies in the face of reality. Clearly, Biden has serious concerns about his mental health, about his acuity. So there's no health concerns. Okay, he's what, 82, 83? He seems to be physically fit for that age. He'll be he's by far the oldest president ever at this point. We all know, if we're not in our 80s now, we know people who are or older than that, and virtually all of them you do lose acuity, you lose the mental quickness, and that's important, obviously, in the job. So to say, oh, there are no health issues, I mean, it's just, you're treating us like we're morons, and I hate that. I so hate that.
Said that she's ready to serve. I think the question, though, is the country ready for a woman in the top job?
All right, so this is it, the woman card. It's just, please, again, and this is what the news does because they don't want to talk about issues. I'm going to talk about issues. I'm going to focus on what the real concerns are about Kamala Harris. And that flack there, and she's given the time by CBS because they want this to be a divisive argument over whether a woman should be vice president. If you argue that she shouldn't be, then you're obviously a bigot, you're sexist, you're a misogynist. That not what policies has she promoted? What and by the way, is she herself qualified in terms of her speaking ability, her articulation? Is she somebody who has the kind of character, which I think does matter, to be president? But of course, this flack, the only thing she mentions is the fact that Harris is a woman. And it's absurd. It's just, that's not what this is about. And no one thinks that's what this is about, except for people who don't want to talk about policy, who don't want to talk about character. Is that what you want? Is that where you want to get your news? So this is what people are concerned about, Ms. I think it's Etienne, I believe is her name. So this is, you say it's all, well, it's because she's a woman. Are Americans ready to vote for a woman? Well, of course we'll vote for a woman. Hillary Clinton, who was a very, very poor choice to be president, who was very much disliked by the great majority of, who's one of the least popular politicians ever. She still got a ton of votes because people thought, rightly or wrongly, that she was less bad than the alternative. Not that people liked her, not that people wanted her to be president, but they said, okay, well, even though we don't like her, and notwithstanding the fact that she's a woman, we'll vote for her. It's not the gender. It's not the sex. It's the record. And again, it's the character that determines why people vote for you. All right, here's Harris on Colbert.
How does that transition happen? How do you go from being such a passionate opponent on such bedrock principles for you, and now you guys seem to be pals?
All right, so this was in the wake of the debate where Harris called out Biden for promoting racist policies, for opposing busing. She said that little girl was me, which was kind of a weird thing to say because I don't believe she was, in fact, somebody who was going to be bused or was forced to go to a school that, wasn't getting sufficient resources. I don't think that was accurate. Which, she presented herself as a victim of bad government policies when she herself wasn't. She wasn't that victim, right? But she said she was. And either way, Colbert makes a very good point. You're all loosey-goosey, touchy-feely, nicey-nicey with Joe Biden in the run-up to the 2020 election for president, and yet you really called him out. You really attacked him in the debate. What's that about? Seemed like a good question. Here's her response.
It was a debate.
Why is that funny? I like, he's sort of snickering. Oh, it was a debate. So what you're saying is, I have no core. I make an argument because I want to win. I think it can score points. It's not about what I really believe or what Joe Biden actually did. It was just to win a debate. It's not about informing the American public, educating people, learning, teaching. No, it's just seeing how many people I can get over, how many people I can succor. I'm certainly not presenting my core, who I am as a person. Well, most of us don't like that. Most of us don't think that's okay. Most of us think that reflects very poor character.
Everybody landed punches like you did, though.
It was a debate.
So you don't mean it.
It was a debate.
So he, Colbert, for all his smiling, and of course he's a total Democratic shill, he's like, you don't mean it? You mean you say things you don't mean? And she's like, yeah, it was a debate. Well, that's why, it's not because she's a woman. That's why we have real serious questions about her. And her record doesn't dispel those concerns. Not in the least. Her record shows a cynical politician who consistently tailors her message to be what she thinks will help her politically or what her backers, her financiers want. And again, this isn't something that goes over well, right? I mean, who likes this? Before Harris soured on Sanders' Medicare for All bill, she grew her email. So she took advantage of how popular Medicare for All is. Back in 2018, 2019, she actually co-sponsored the bill with Bernie in the U.S. Senate. And then once she got pushback, once the billionaire class, I think her husband's a Wall Street lawyer. I may be wrong about that. Sure, she heard from him. Oh, well, maybe it's not such a good idea. Maybe we really don't want Medicare for all. And that's why people don't like her. That's why people are cynical. That's why people are skeptical. That's why she's an anchor around Joe Biden. I was proud to be the first Senate Democrat to come out in support of his bill. She ran that ad. That's the ad The Intercept is talking about. And I have to tell you, when I learned that Harris, let me say this, when I heard from Harris that she supported Medicare for all, I really conned to her. Her record was not good. I don't believe. It wasn't good. It wasn't progressive when she was a senator. Before she was senator, when she was attorney general of the state of California, it wasn't a good record. She wasn't a progressive prosecutor. And by the way, I totally reject, this is something Brianna Joy Gray says, oh, there's no such thing, you can't be a progressive prosecutor. Of course you can be a progressive prosecutor. Prosecutors in many ways are, if they do their job right, are very progressive. Progressive in the sense of trying to make life better for poor, struggling, working people who are very often the victim of all sorts of crimes. Property crimes, crimes of violence, for sure, where they're the victims, but also crimes where they're targeted by unscrupulous employers and charlatans and people who con artists and the like. So yes, of course you can be a progressive prosecutor, but that wasn't Kamala Harris. Not in the least, but hey, she's for Medicare for all. That absolved. Just like I don't like Larry Hogan, I'm not going to vote for Larry Hogan, but hey, he did promote a program. He did, in fact, implement a program to help pregnant women. That's a really good thing. And that because of that, I'm less dogmatic. In fact, I push back on the notion that therefore you have to vote for a very flawed Democrat because as bad as Hogan is, you can point to some decent things he did as well. So first, Kamala Harris supports Bernie Sanders' plan. She co-sponsors Bernie Sanders' plan, which would have gotten all private insurance out of the business. You can't get private. No, you get your health care. It's paid for. We don't need private insurance. And why not? Because health care is paid for by the government. So why would you need insurance? You go to the doctor, the bill, you don't get a bill. The doctor bills the government. So you don't need private insurance. There's no cause for private insurance. Why would there be private insurance under such a system? Because if you want go to a doctor who refuses to bill the government and puts their hand out, and I think in some countries you can't. This would be illegal. It's not illegal under Bernie's plan. Bernie's plan said, "Hey, you want to pay out of your own pocket for health care? Go ahead. We're not going to stop you. You're a billionaire. You want to have a doc. You can find a doctor who can make a practice that's solely paid for by super rich people, go ahead. We're not going to play that game. Our doctors will be paid for by us. That's it, out of tax money." That was Bernie's plan. That was Harris's plan. Harris announced that she was going to co-sponsor. She backed down. She backed away from that as soon as she got pushback. Instead, her plan left in the private for-profit insurers. And at that point, it's not Medicare for all. At that point, there's going to be corruption by the by Wall Street, by the short timers, the profiteers. They're going to figure out all kinds of ways to take more and more money out of the system. That's not Medicare for all. So, do I think it was the worst plan in the world? No. Would it be better than Obamacare? Yes. But the second you allow this, you're going to have significant problems. Why would any private insurer offer Medicare plans unless they were somehow skimming the system and unless they were somehow profiting off of you? If there's true Medicare for all, then everything is covered. Why would you ever need private insurance? You wouldn't. So obviously this is not ideal. This is what it goes. We haven't heard from her on healthcare since area. This was an interesting article by KFF Health News, which I guess is something to do with Kaiser. And they recognized the weaknesses, right? The problems that Harris was presenting as early as back in 2020 when she was running as the vice president, or was about to. I guess she had been announced. Biden was going to pick her if she hadn't been confirmed in the convention. Harris's shifting position on Medicare for all in spotlight. And so, first she was for Medicare for all, no private insurers. Then she's for private insurers. This is why we don't trust her. This is the problems we have with her. It's not about her being a woman. And it sucks. It sucks that the corporate media refuses to address the real concerns. But why would they? They don't want us to have Medicare for all. Their power and influence comes in large part from being a source of health care for their employees, and also from the money that the for-profit healthcare industry pours into media. So you see the two things there, the two major issues. Her record doesn't match with what she claims, and she waffled on Medicare for all. She will say what the people she's talking to, she thinks they want to hear. And of course, she is she's not a good public speaker. She just isn't. I don't think that's the most awful thing in the world, but it ain't good. I'd rather have an articulate president. That was one of Obama's strengths. I always really liked hearing Obama speak. Now, that said, unfortunately, someone who's a good speaker can get over on you. They talk a good game. Talk is cheap. But all that said, I would assume we all like when we have somebody who can present their position clearly, concisely, and let us know what it is. That's good. That's something we want. Pretty sure that's something we all want in a leader. And then that's a key part of being a leader. A good football coach, just because, say, with the Super Bowl, is someone who communicates their vision to the team, and then the team is able to and gives the team the opportunity and the ability to win by following the coach's vision. And if you don't have a president who can communicate a vision and how to achieve it, you have a limited president. I think that's who Kamala Harris is, as well as someone who's dishonest in many ways. Dishonest by presenting herself as one thing, but really having governed in a very different way. That's why she doesn't help. That's why we're not better off, or we're not thinking we'll be better off if she's president. And that's why her statement, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to lead, isn't particularly comforting to us. All right, it's a little early. I went so long yesterday. I'm going to give everyone a break and cut off now. There's a lot more. I really want to get to what a disaster. Tomorrow we have a comedy show. We'll have guests from I believe he's from CNN. And let me just, I don't want to get this embarrassing. I should have it. Liz Croydon returns. She's bringing me another top guest. This is going to be Adam Gable. Adam Gable. So I'm looking forward to having Adam on. He is a contributor, I believe, at CNN. So you aren't going to want to miss that. That's tomorrow at noon. So have a great afternoon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being part of Halitics.